Welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast.
Well, hello there and welcome to another installment of the Exponential Australia podcast. We, again, are just so glad that you would join with us today as we seek to hear from a wide range of Aussie and global leaders, particularly in the areas of multiplication and church planting in Australia. And today we are so glad to be joined by leaders, Sam and Esther Dix, who have or in the process of planting Disciple House Church, which is quite a story that we're going to get to today, but very exciting. They are in their first year of church planting. Guys, we're so glad that you've been able to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Well, guys, particularly for those who may not have heard of who you are, the church that you've planted, you guys hail from Perth, Western Australia. Why don't you give us a bit of a backdrop to your ministry journey, your family, what has led you to the point of planting this church in 2022 and, the exciting years that have, gone before that?
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we're both so blessed to have grown up in Christian homes. Esther's parents are kind of, first generation believers. And for me, I'm a third generation pastor. So really blessed to have grown up in that environment. We grew up sleeping under the chairs in church and just enjoying God, but had our own, personal moments probably in our teenage years, those God encounters where God would speak to us. For me personally, it was Youth Alive Camp when I was 14, God calling me to ministry then. And so that really set me up in my younger years, enabled me to make good, wise decisions and helped me not stray off the path. And so literally when I finished school, went straight into ministry, straight out of school on 1 day a week in my youth ministry at the time. And then, but from there progressively hearing the voice of God and just being faithful to his path, here we are today, just serving in a different way. And I'll let Esther speak to her journey.
Yeah. So I don't have a specific, moment of being like, this is my faith for myself. But I think, through, there was a camp when I was about 9 and there was, different, moments just personally in my own time with God. And I think just it becoming real for me. Kind of have done the journey as well. I think started in youth ministry as well, doing youth leading, and we kind of met not too long after that. And I think I never kind of saw myself necessarily doing pastoring or anything like that. But I guess us getting together kind of, Sam having that on his life, it almost unlocked it in mine. And so, it kind of was like, actually, that, and it just kind of flowed organically from there. But that kind of is kind of how I've landed in ministry today.
Incredible, guys. And why don't you speak to particularly where you've been in the last season of ministry prior to planting Disciple House? We're going to dig into the depths and the journey that God has worked in your life in that season. But where have you guys been up until 2021?
Yeah, so in 2018, we started at Centrepoint Church on staff there, on team there, and we just had such a great season in that church, real heart for church planting in that church, Pastor Joel and Sharon Chalaya, and I believe we're going to hear from Pastor Joel soon on this podcast, which is awesome. And really, when we started with them, we were actually very honest with them and said, hey, we feel the call to church plant one day. And that didn't shock them or surprise them or take them off guard. They were like, we're a church planting church. Incredible. And so, to be honest, we're probably going to train you harder. We're probably going to really disciple you even more, because we just want to bring out that call of God in you. So on a practical level, we were the youth pastors there, and also we're leading worship ministry as well. And just serving the local church, the local people, and seeing God do amazing things through that. Yeah.
And the kind of catalyst for us realizing that church planning was on our lives was actually the first youth ministry that we youth pastored. We just been part of it, and we had a youth camp. And I don't know if you know Pastor Teo Conda.
Yeah.
So he was the guest speaker, and on one of the nights he was prophesying, and he actually brought us up and said, and we were engaged at the time, so we were kind of, about to start our marriage together. Youth ministry was our main focus. We were like, we love youth and youth pastoring and everything.
We still do.
It'll always be there. And he just said, there's a church in you. And that was kind of the first time that had ever, I definitely for me, I'm not sure about you, but for me, it was like that hadn't even been on my mind, on my radar. Again, just hearing that word, it almost just resonated so deeply and unlocked something. And it was like, actually, there's something to that. And so, over the course of the years that followed, we had different words from people confirming that. And I guess we could sense that was in the future. We never knew when.
Yes.
We didn't know how. And to be honest, the journey to that was not anything like we thought it would be. And so we kind of just were taken on the journey by God to get there somehow. But God obviously bringing us to Centrepoint, going under Pastor Joel and Sharon was so key.
Yep.
And so, that's been a massive blessing for us to start. Yeah.
Amazing. And I guess that's one of the things that really intrigues me about your journey, Sam and Esther, particularly as you were bold in sharing what you felt like the Lord had laid upon your heart by way of church planting. And at that time, as an 18-year-old, that must have sounded like just a really crazy thing to say to your pastor at the time. But to come from a church that has had an amazing legacy and DNA of church planting. And so Pastor Joel and Pastor Sharon, who lead Centrepoint, who are also responsible for leading Harvest Net, which is an amazing network of church planting churches in Western Australia. And as you rightly said, we're going to be able to hear from Pastor Joel in a couple of weeks' time on our Exponential. At the time that this airs, we're going to be able to hear some of his heart for church planting in Western Australia.
Okay.
I wonder what you would be able to share, particularly someone who sensed the call of God upon their life to plant a church, how much it meant to be part of a church that kind of had a vision for church planting. They realized that, and of course, churches have all different seasons and stuff like that, but particularly as a church that knew that it wanted to plant churches. As a younger leader who would have come before a senior pastor and said that, in some churches that may not have necessarily gone down well, but to say that within the context of a church that wanted to plant churches, could you speak to how much that DNA meant for you guys going forward?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it meant everything. There's church planting, and even the call of church planting can feel quite lonely. Because it takes a pretty crazy person to want to do it, but also it's a call. It's a call. It's not necessarily you don't sign up for it online. It's something that God speaks to you about. So it can feel quite lonely. So to be able to share open and honestly that this is where we feel like God's leading us, and for that to be embraced, it just means everything. For it to not be about someone else's kingdom and about someone else's empire, but be about the kingdom of God and what God's doing. It meant everything. And it just meant that, when we were struggling or when we were even dreaming, we could just share that and not feel like, we would be squashed like, oh, come on, if you're going to be these church planters, you got to get this right, that was never the case. And then when we're dreaming, it's like, wow, that could be it. That could be awesome. Along the journey at Centrepoint, there was a dream that I had, and I was able to openly and honestly share that. Again, there was no timeline. It was just, it was actually the first dream of kind of where we would go. And that was, looking back now, that was 2 or maybe 3 years before we planted. I could just share it straight away. Just like, this is what God's saying.
Yeah.
Like, how amazing, so it really meant everything.
That's amazing. Esther, I wonder what that would have meant for you, particularly as, again, our big heart and prayer on behalf of Exponential is that we would see many more younger men and women who would feel that towards church planting.
Yeah.
And almost to dispel the myth that, I could never do that.
Yeah.
As you say, Sam, as crazy as church planting is, what it means for a church to actually call that out in younger men and women. I wonder, Esther, what that meant for you as you considered, oh, wow, like God, you're leading us to plant a church.
Yeah. I think we had the privilege of knowing Pastor Joel before we joined Centrepoint through ACC. And so we knew his heart, that was his heart to plant churches, and he's very kingdom focused. And so I guess coming to Centrepoint, it was just to experience it firsthand. Just that culture of, it's not just him, like it's actually the whole church. They rally around people. Their whole phrase is rescue, restore, release.
Wow.
And so they're kind of used to just sending people out, not necessarily just church planting, but other things.
Yeah.
And so, I think in our first couple of months there, we actually got another prophetic word basically saying, and this was in like a context of all the staff and leaders and
board members.
Yeah, everyone. And we're just joined. Like basically, God has brought you here. This is a preparation season. And God is adding to you, spiritual mothers, fathers, cousins, sisters, brothers. This is a preparation time for you to plant. And no awkwardness. Everyone's like, yay!
Yeah.
Like, so
listening back to the word now,
Yeah.
you can hear and people's voices going, yes, wow, like in the background.
Yeah.
And and we needed that.
Yeah.
We needed that community, because we still have that family in that community now.
Yeah.
We still have people messaging us saying, we love you guys, we miss you guys.
Yeah.
Wow.
But we're so glad, you're doing what God's called you to do.
Yeah. And I think for me, being part of a church that champions, obviously church planting, but also, guys and like men and women in leadership has been awesome. So it's never, Sam was the one that was on staff, but it was never like, oh, okay, it's Sam and Esther, and we were both, champion together. So yeah, it's been amazing. It's so life-giving to be part of a church that has that kind of outward focus. And I guess for us, we hope that our church would also be the same, that, we want our church to be open-handed with people and raise up and release, hopefully the church plan as well. So yeah, I guess that generational impact as well.
Amazing. So good. And that's such a beautiful picture that you even paint there, Sam, of like that room of people cheering you on in that. Like would the Aussie church have that level of boldness of faith of going, let's see young men and women across our country take bold steps of faith that might lead to new people being found in Jesus and new churches being planted. That's a very palpable image that I think you've just been able to share. And I guess for those who aren't familiar with the story of HarvestNet as well, like you said, we're going to hear from Pastor Joel in a couple of weeks' time. But there is that legacy, there is that generational kind of lineage of, particularly back to the likes of a leader like David Storer, that has been able to plant a church that really, by and large, has had its origins in planting many, many churches all throughout, particularly within the ACC.
Yes.
Like that. That's like, would you just shed a bit more light on some of the story of HarvestNet and how that's been such a gift to you guys stepping into that?
Yeah. HarvestNet is such a gift to our state, and we believe it's going to start to become a gift to our nation as well, and the nations actually. But I'll let Pastor Joel speak into that. But HarvestNet in the beginning was just Pastor David Storer. He was pastoring PCLC, as it was known back then, Perth Christian Life Centre. And the first church plant was Ken and Chrissy Lee, which are now Nations Church, which is a multi-campus church here in Perth, but also they have some campuses in other nations as well. And then the next church plant was Joel and Sharon Chalai of Centrepoint Church. And there's been more since then. And basically, the picture is that David Storer raised these sons and daughters in their house. And once they heard the call, or once he felt the call on their life to church plant, he didn't hold them back. Yeah. He just released them. He said, let's go, release you guys. There was getting them on stage, saying to them, hey, if feel like you're called to go with these guys, you need to go.
Mm.
And if you feel called to give, come on, let's give, let's send these guys out.
Yeah.
And again, it's just that whole kingdom heart of release. And now we kind of feel like we're stepping into that second generation of what HarvestNet is now doing. Now that Joel has since taken on HarvestNet, we're reaping the benefits of Pastor David Storer's sacrifice over 15 years ago. Incredible. You know, when Nations was first planted, and many others are now reaping that benefit. And to be a part of that network and to have people cheering you on, who are, some of them are 1 year ahead of us, some of them are 5 years, some of them are 15 years ahead of us, is amazing. And with different gifts and different graces on each church, and to not be, not in unity, but to be unified, and to have them cheering you on is absolutely incredible.
I love that. And I do pray as well that we see much more of that, that HarvestNet would have its influence across Australia, that the different churches and denominations would see what it could look like to actually go on a journey where it's like we're releasing people to do even more amazing things in different parts of the country. Where I'd love to kind of mine now into is particularly your church planting journey of the last kind of, particularly the last 12 months. We heard you guys talk about before how God put that on your life some time ago. But as we were talking about off air before we hit record, that you guys have effectively in your first calendar year of planting Disciple House Church. And we're going to talk more about, why you've called it Disciple House and your reflections upon, the church that God has called you to be. But how has it all been going? Crazy series of years to be going out, planting a church, leaving Centrepoint in December last year, commence gathering in April this year. You're going to have your official launch later on this year. Tell us about the journey thus far, if you can.
Yeah, well, I think God was very, very purposeful when he spoke to us and gave us the green light. I think we mentioned before, we knew we were going to plant, but we didn't know when. And the when came in January 2020, while Corona was just something that was happening elsewhere. And it was only on the news for 2 minutes, it wasn't something that was on the news constantly. And so we're like, great, here's the green light. And then COVID kind of hit. And, looking in hindsight now, that's God preparing us, just before it really got into it, God said, no, this is going to happen. And so, yeah, we've had our challenges, but we've just really had faith that God's going to see us through in the journey so far. The journey has been different compared to how other HarvestNet plants have gone. And there's a few reasons for that, obviously COVID, but also Perth, we kind of have this culture where you don't cross the north of the river. So the Swan River runs through the city, as do most cities have a river in our nation. But there's a real divide between the north and the south. And so Centrepoint Church is about 25 minutes south of the river, and our church equally the same, about 25 minutes north of the river. And so when we announced that we were planting with COVID happening, we literally had people come up to us and say, hey, we love this vision. This is amazing, but it's just too far away for us. It's just a little bit too hard. And so we've started with a lot smaller group than we thought that we would have, but God's been faithful in that group. Ironically, we started with 12 people, which is for us, which is super funny, being Disciple House. And so, yeah, since then so as you said, we launched Sunday gatherings in April, and we called it Sunday gatherings because it was kind of a Sunday gathering is a midway point between us being a connect group and having a full Sunday service. So that's why we called it Sunday gathering, because we wanted to do something that was not who we weren't yet, but we really felt to gather on a Sunday. And so we've been doing that for a few months now. The family's growing. We're seeing people really change, both through attending on a Sunday, but more so through discipleship in a group setting and also in a one-on-one setting. And we're looking ahead to officially launch, to really let the community know that we're in the area, that we're here for them. we want to bring freedom to people.
So great. Esther, how about you? Like, what have been some of the highs and lows as you are coming up on launching and the initial stages of church planting?
Yeah, I think some of the highs have obviously just been having such an amazing support behind us, and people cheering us on, and a great support network. We've actually found that God has been so good to us in the area of finances for our church. Like, we have not lacked in that area, and we just, kind of when we first started that process of like, okay, fundraising and things like that, we were like, we don't know how this is going to happen. But God just, through a few different miracles, brought just crazy finance to us. So that has been just like, we kind of thought that would be the harder side, and that's probably been the easier side, funny enough. And so that has just been encouraging, because I guess we haven't done anything to earn that. And I guess that confirmation of God's call. Probably the low has been the people, in terms of, I think we kind of thought we'd start out with more people than we did. And so kind of having to grapple with that, like, okay, cool, how do we build from there? God, is there something that we're not doing? Or is this also part of your plan for us to start at this size and to build from there? And so, but there's also been a beautiful side to starting smaller as well. Of course, no one wants to start necessarily small. Everyone wants the big and the grand, but there's actually been some really beautiful gifts in that. And I think that kind of, it's really forced us to build community really well. And from there we're seeing growth. And so I guess the highs and lows are also just part of natural church life. I guess we just feel them even more at our size. Sometimes.
The phrase that we keep saying all the time is, at this stage you really feel your highs. The high,
yes,
you really feel your lows. There's kind of no mid ground. It's high or it's low. Even just the other day, we had a real high in the morning, and then by that afternoon, a real low. And it's just so funny, the journey. And you just got to commit it all to God.
And that's actually is what we've found, that it's not necessarily all about what God's doing externally and through us. Of course, that's what we want. We want to see more of that. But it's almost been like in this season, it's also what God's been just doing internally in us, and refining us and making sure that we're fully submitted, that it's ultimately his church, it's not ours. And so, it's even though there's been highs and lows, overall, we have loved it and wouldn't trade it for anything.
Love that.
So,
and particularly as I connect with lots of different church planters around the country, that is a very common experience, to feel the highs and to feel the deep lows, but then that reflection that God is doing so much within the life of the church planter. Even we want to see wonderful things happen around us, but he's giving you guys more authority and more passion for the lost, and more preparedness to do anything, whatever it takes to advance the kingdom. And I'm just so inspired by particularly your calling to an area. Even when people would have said, we're not going to go there, you go, well, the Lord has called us to this part of Perth, and that's just such an encouragement. I wonder if you guys could then share a little bit more with our audience today about particularly the name of your church, Disciple House, recognizing that one of the greatest needs and maybe one of the ugly parts of the pandemic has been a recognition that there's been a great lack of discipleship sometimes within some of our churches. And I think we've all seen that and experienced that over the last couple of years. And obviously the Great Commission being to go and make disciples. And we know that where disciples are made, churches are planted. And so for you guys, as you've been able to reflect on what does it mean to lead a healthy church, to plant a church, why Disciple House?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think it's so funny, whenever we'd be away on holidays during our time youth pastoring, and I guess, like we were saying before, we were very much in that season. So we knew in the future we'd be church planting, our pastors knew, but there's that tension and balance of this is the season we're in,
Yes.
and we need to be fully committed, focused in this season, and at the right time God will open up that door and show us more. So what we found was that, generally week to week we were just doing the youth and worship thing at our church at Centrepoint, but when we go on holiday, it was almost like, and we didn't have the weight of the responsibility of just church life. We just dream a little, and God would just kind of start speaking to us. And I think we just realized that our favorite part of ministry, which is also sometimes the hardest, is seeing growth in people, and seeing those, having time for those one-on-ones or small groups, or just really having intentional discipleship in people's lives. And sometimes that looks like having a conversation and having to pull someone up on something and in love, and it kind of sucks for a little bit, but then you actually see them come around and they're like, no, I'm so glad we had that conversation, and you see them grow closer to Jesus. And so I guess we just, from that, we were like, that's really what we want our church to be all about. That
people of strength was the phrase that we used in those times, in those holiday times. And it's so funny, there was actually one time we were driving down from Perth to Albany, which is a 6-hour drive over here, on holiday, and there was this tree in this field, and it was completely dry, like dry grass, but this tree was just so green and so tall and so vibrant. And like both of us at the same time said, did you just sense that? Did you just feel that? And God spoke to us through this tree as we're driving 110 kilometers down. We only saw the tree for about a second. And it was just this picture that, like, people of strength, that even though what surrounds them might be dry and what is around them might not be growing, they're strong, they have strength, and they're growing, and they're becoming this lighthouse wherever they are. And it was just this picture of strength. And then to kind of even jump off what you were saying before with, what was revealed through COVID, that idea of strength for us, God began to then put all of the pieces together. And the final piece of the puzzle was him actually telling us that people of strength only come through discipleship. That's where it is, and that's how it happens. And so that for us was that it was a light bulb moment where we're like, oh my gosh. And really, as we've spoken before, just that realization that, wow, maybe we've been building the church on a blueprint that isn't producing people of strength, that isn't producing people who are even able to bear fruit, that are able to replicate it in others. And so for us, as we're praying, we're like, people of strength, a church. And then we just landed on this phrase, disciple house. And for us, disciple house, it's a great name. Like, personally, we think it's an amazing name, and we've got great branding and whatnot. But for us, and even we were just praying the other night, it's actually an anchor for us, because there's no way that we can't not do discipleship in our church. It's impossible because we're called Disciple House.
Accountability in our name.
We're there. That's what we have to do. And it's also a declaration that we will be a house of discipleship. And really believing for that.
And I guess that metaphor of the tree that we had, the thing is that doesn't happen overnight. And trees of strength takes time, takes years. Discipleship is not a quick fix. It's actually kind of the slow game most of the time. And so I guess for us, we being in church life our whole lives, and as you know, there's so many things that can vie for a church's attention. And there's so many different models out there. And I guess for us, the question was, what if all of our efforts and our energy and our time was focused purely on building people, and purely on discipleship? And so, I guess having that philosophy, I guess, or that value, that might look different in different seasons, how it happens. But I guess that's kind of the grounding anchor for us of, no matter what season, discipleship is central. So yeah, that's us.
I love that, guys. And there's a sense in which, you know, it feels like years ago that may have seemed unsexy, like not the
It is unsexy. Still is.
Still is.
discipleship and church planting. I
Yeah.
wish I knew beforehand that it was a lot messier. You know, it was a lot more messy than I thought it was going to be. But that is the stuff of God's kingdom, you know, being in the lives of people, helping to shape people into the image of Jesus, and then helping people to be able to take that into all the corners of the earth. And so I just think that's a beautiful vision of what you guys are doing. You shared before, you know, particularly around that sense of, you know, there are some, particularly within Harvest Net, that might be 12 months ahead of you guys on the journey, 5 years ahead of you on the journey. And I wonder, just to wrap up our time together, this podcast that has just been so refreshing to hear from you guys, like, what would you say to someone who, as you shared way back in 2018, you started to sense the call of God upon your life to plant a church? And we know that, you know, there may be leaders within God's church listening today, wondering, Lord, is that me? You know, is that something that you have called me to? And as you guys were able to, I guess, dispel some of the misconceptions of, oh, actually, God, you are calling us to do this. To those who are maybe half a step or a couple of steps behind you guys on that journey, what would you say to someone in that situation, beginning to sense that invitation to prayerfully explore whether God was leading them to plant a church?
That's a great question. I think, and I'll let you go in a second, but for me, you know, that journey of feeling the green light, saying, you know, it's time to plant. And for someone that might be a real quick season where they hear the call, and then it could be like, it's time to go now. For me, that season between feeling God's green light and it actually happening was an 18-month transition. And so I knew that it was going to be that long. And so I made a real conscious decision that I'm not going to let my heart leave the house that I'm in right now too soon.
Yeah.
It got to the point where in November of the month before we were planting out, Esther was like, you need to switch, you need to flick the switch.
We actually have,
we have some stuff we need to do, because and that was my heart. I really wanted to finish well. And really, we're now in that blessed state where we're sons and daughters of Joel and Sharon, because we believe we finished our season well. And so that would be my biggest advice, to honor those you're under now. You know, what God, the reason we've planted a church is because God's called us to do something different than what was happening in Centrepoint. That doesn't mean that what's happening in Centrepoint and all these other churches is wrong. It just means there's a unique grace, there's a unique flavor. And so you also need to submit that and honor what you're building right now is not your church, it's someone else's grace, it's someone else's church in that season, and to just make sure you don't start to release what God's putting on your life too soon. Otherwise, there can be some tension that can start. And yeah, I guess just to have that maturity to see out the season, to honor those you're under, would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, I guess for us, it was the confirmation of people outside of us. So like I said before, you know, the starting point of our church planning journey wasn't, you know, oh, we're frustrated in the church that we're in, or, you know, any other reason. We got a word about it. And so, you know, whether that's someone getting a prophetic word, or even just having someone, you know, over in authority over them say, actually, I see that in you. I think that was really key for us to, it wasn't necessarily just out of us, it was confirmed in community. And so that kind of, really confirmed. And again, we had multiple voices along the way, speaking to that, confirming it. So that's been a real big thing for us to stand on now as well, because sometimes what can happen before you plant is you just see the green grass, you see the vision, you see it,
then you realize
amazing.
You need to mow that green grass, manure that green grass. You know, it's not just going to grow itself.
And so, you know, you can't wait. You're like, oh yeah, I can't wait till we can do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I guess having, you know, people confirming it, or a prophetic word or something like that, means that in the times where it's not easy, you actually have something to stand on, which goes, this wasn't just our idea or us trying to do our own thing. This was God's idea. So
Sam, Esther, you guys are in it, and we're so inspired by your obedience, and we're cheering you on. And we so appreciate you guys taking the time to really share the journey where you're at right now. You're in the thick of it. And on behalf of Exponential Australia, we're just so thankful for all that God's doing in and through you guys. And we're cheering you on to everything that lays before you in the journey.
Thanks heaps.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening. For more great resources, please head to our website at exponential.org.au.